All right, welcome everyone. It is another Teen Science Cafe. Give me a moment, I'm going to share my screen for you all. Who do we have with us today? I know you guys know the drill, but hang on, I'm just trying to move some stuff around. You know, the mouse never works when you want it to, right? All right, so today is Wednesday, so it's Teen Science Day. Hi, Simon and Jack. Nice to see you. So for those of you who are new, what we like to do when we sign in, we just have everyone find the chat box, write your name and where you're from, because it's always fun to just see who is with us today. If you don't know me, I'm Lauren Traster. I'm the 4-H Teen and Leadership Program Coordinator here for the Vermont 4-H program. Someone's name is Fuzzy. I can see your real name. I think it's Alice, but that's awesome. So hi everyone. If you need closed captioning, I'm going to put the link in the chat for you right now. So keep on introducing yourselves. I'm going to just give it a moment because we are, as always, expecting a pretty good crowd. Wow, I see there is 3 of you from Braintree all in the same room. That's awesome. Adrian's from the true capital of USA. That's right, Adrian. You and I know that Rhode Island is the place to be. Oh, Fuzzy, that's awesome. Okay, love that. Thank you for clarifying. When I was in high school, everyone called me Lola because there was a comic strip where there was a character named Lola Granola, and with my name being Lauren, it fit. So I love the nicknames. So all right, you guys, we are going to just go over our protocols for when we are here in Zoom. We are all, well, not we, because I can talk, you can hear me, you'll hear the presenter, but you all are muted. And the way that you're going to communicate today is either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And we use those 2 spaces very differently. The chat box is where you are going to communicate with the presenter. If she asks you questions, you'll respond there. If you have a thought or a comment about something she's talking about, you'll put it there too. Any questions, though, that you have for our presenter will go into the Q&A box, and she will get to them as she can. So if your question is very specific to a slide, like try to ask your question so we really understand, you know, what your question is, because the slide and the content that she just covered, it may be 10 minutes before she gets to your question. All questions get answered, but you do have the opportunity in the Q&A box to upvote a question. There is a thumbs up. So if you like someone's question, or if it was the question you were planning on asking, just click on the thumbs up and it just moves the question up the queue. But again, all questions will get answered. And I like to say there is no bad question. So if it's something that's coming to your mind, ask it. You can ask your questions anonymously if you're more comfortable that way. But just make sure you use this opportunity to ask your questions. That's how we all learn, right? So just be courteous and respectful today. Make sure that you don't create any distractions in the chat box. So don't veer off topic. Don't have side conversations. The chat box is really to stay on topic, and anything other than that can be distracting to other people who are trying to pay attention. So just stay engaged, participate fully. It's going to be a good one today. As always, I just want to share with you other opportunities. So we're beginning to wind down our fall programming. We'll have a bunch new programming that will get announced. I don't know when, but I know we're going to have some new stuff starting in January 2021, but still things that you can get involved in. Obviously, the science cafes will go until right before Christmas in December. We do have a speak up contest that you can participate in. You just have to submit your entry by the end of November. And we have about another week and a half left of the Youth Environmental Summit. So you can check out those programs at the website listed on this slide. I always like to give some attention to our friends at the Vermont Brain Bee. They do programming I believe every Tuesday. So if you're into neuroscience or want to learn more about the brain, I don't even think you have to participate in the Brain Bee to do their sessions. So you can check out what they have going on at vermontbrainbee.com. And then we do have some friends that also are doing some science cafes. Our friends at the Lake Champlain Sea Grant have one more session of their Zoom a Scientist in early December. And then our friends in Maine have a couple of sessions, and they keep adding. So you can check out these websites, and I'll try to get them in the chat for you guys before today is over. But those are programs that you can check out. So let's get to our topic today. Today we are going to be talking about consumer products in your health, an intro to environmental health and exposure. Our presenter is Julie Marks, and Julie earned a Master's of Science in Environmental Health from the University of Washington in Seattle back in 2015. Her research-based thesis focused on measuring the rate at which chemicals migrate from clothes through the skin and into the bloodstream. She earned a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science from James Cook University in Australia in 2007. So with 10 years of combined experience working in environmental conservation, water, sanitation, and hygiene, and consumer product manufacturing sectors, Julie is committed to supporting actions that lead to reduced human exposure to untested or harmful chemicals and to the development of products that support healthier communities. Fun fact, Julie grew up here in Vermont and attended Champlain Valley Union High School, and she now lives in Jericho. So welcome, Julie. We are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you, Lauren. It's really fun to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Great.
So let's see, can everybody see my slides now?
Not yet. Did you hit the share screen? There you go.
There we go. Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to introduce you today to environmental health and talk a bit about consumer products and how they can affect your health. So I want to start today with a little bit about me. Lauren gave a pretty good introduction there, but I want to give you a little background as to where I come from and how I've gotten through life to end up where I am today. Then we'll dive into what environmental health is, introduce you to the field and the topic of environmental health. Next, I'll go into exposure to consumer products and some chemicals that you should know about and know to look out for. And then we are going to touch on a few examples of when environmental health shows up in the news and has most recently as well. And then I'll end with looking at what your risk may be to exposure to consumer products and talk a little bit about how you can protect yourself and reduce your risk. And of course, where to find more information. And we'll do questions throughout, but definitely reserve time at the end for questions. And so by the end of this lecture, my hope really is that you'll have a basic understanding of what environmental health is as a discipline, and you'll also be able to look at the consumer products in your home and in your life more carefully and be able to investigate them yourself in order to try to figure out if they are something that may be posing a risk to your health or the health of anyone in your household. So a little bit about me and my journey through life. As Lauren said, I am a Vermonter. I was born and raised here in Vermont and went to CVU High School and graduated in 2004. And I think the biggest impact that had on me was I learned to scuba dive as a part of my senior year grad challenge project. And that really just changed my life. I fell in love with with scuba diving, with underwater ecosystems, and I really wanted nothing else than to be a marine biologist. So I told my parents I wanted to go to college on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and that's what I did. I moved to Australia and studied environmental science. That's a photo of a class that I took where we were out on the beach with some scientific equipment measuring waves and ocean activity. And a fun fact there was I was actually the first female to graduate with that degree from that university. It was a brand new program that year, and it was a really fun and unique experience. So after I graduated from college, I got very into international volunteering. I went to Iceland and worked as a wilderness management volunteer, camping out in this field and removing invasive species. That then led me to travel to Nepal, where I lived for 4 months in a rural village and volunteered to teach English at a school there. And then that eventually led me to Cambodia, where I spent 2 months building and distributing biosand water filters so that families in rural villages could filter their water and have clean water to drink, and so they wouldn't get as sick as they were getting before from drinking contaminated water. And so after all that worldly travel and wonderful, amazing experiences, I came back to Vermont and applied for a job with a company called Seventh Generation, which is in Burlington, Vermont, and they make consumer products like laundry detergent, cleaners, toilet paper, diapers, and they hired me as a product authenticity intern. And that's really where I had my first introduction to epidemiology and environmental health. So after years of working for Seventh Generation, I eventually wanted to study more about environmental health. So I applied for a graduate degree at the University of Washington in Seattle. And as Lauren said, my research thesis involved, I was supported by Seventh Generation to do this project, and it essentially answered the question, do chemical ingredients in laundry detergents stay on clothing after washing and get into people's bodies when worn? And if so, how much? So in this picture, you can see basically what I did with my advisor was developed a new method, a new way of measuring how chemicals that are in clothing can move from the fabric through the different layers of your skin and get into your bloodstream. And then eventually I moved back to Vermont a couple of years ago and started my own consulting practice called Healthy Home Assessments. And this is just an independent venture. I work with people to help remove harmful products from their homes and their lives. And I still work with 7Gen and other consumer product companies to help them make and market healthier products. So any questions before I move on? Okay. All right, so I wanted to start with a pop quiz just for fun. So question number 1 is a multiple choice. The average teenager is exposed to how many chemicals every day before leaving for school?
All right, so I've launched that poll. If for some reason you don't see it, you can type your answer in the chat. Otherwise, do it in the poll and we'll see what you guys think. And I will say I've noticed a lot of you have found the raise hand button. Normally I disable it. I forgot today. Please stop doing that. We're not going to be using that feature and it's very distracting. So thank you. All right, so it looks like the majority are saying 51 to 100. How'd they do?
All right. They did pretty well, but in reality, it's hundreds. But a lot of you were right on and very close. All right, next question. True or false? The products that you buy in the store or online only contain chemicals that are proven to be safe.
All right, just launched that poll. What do you think? True or false? Looks like most people have weighed in with everyone thinking it's false.
All right. Congratulations. That is unfortunately true. Fewer than 1% of all the chemicals that we find in consumer products on the market have not been tested for their safety by an independent party. Okay, another true or false. Outdoor air is usually healthier than indoor air.
All right, let me get that poll up. Give me one sec. Oh, wrong way. Okay, true or false? Outdoor air is usually cleaner than indoor air. It looks like by 2/3 majority are saying true, although a couple of people in the chat says it depends, and Dale says it depends on the area, like China, no. So how'd they do?
Well, I absolutely appreciate everybody who thought enough to think about it depends, because of course it does. But generally speaking, this is true. Indoor spaces have a lot of sources of pollution that we cannot see or smell. And because they're not well ventilated often, those pollutants can build up in the air and actually make it dirtier, so to speak, than outdoor air. Even in places where the outdoor air is contaminated, indoor air can often still be more contaminated. All right, and I think there's one more question. Okay, back to a multiple choice. Which health outcome or health outcomes can be caused by exposure to chemicals found in consumer products? Obesity, depression, learning disabilities, asthma, none or all of the above.
All right, the poll is launched. Let's see what you guys think. In the chat, we have a couple that say F, and then one that says E or D. But it looks like majority are saying all of the above. How'd they do?
Well, the majority rules. This is true. All of the above health outcomes have been linked to exposure to chemicals found in consumer products. So you guys are on your way to being environmental health specialists already. Okay. So now I really want to give you a formal introduction to what environmental health is. So environmental health is a branch within public health and global health. It works in concert along with other studies such as epidemiology, which I'm sure you've heard that word a lot recently around the COVID pandemic. Environmental health also works closely with biostatisticians, occupational health and safety, emergency preparedness and disaster planning, but all under this big umbrella of public health, which is the science of protecting and improving the health of people and their communities. So more specifically, environmental health is defined as the study of adverse effects of environmental factors and conditions on human health and well-being. and the development and implementation of prevention and control strategies and programs. And that's rather wordy, but to break it down a little bit for you, we're going to start with the adverse effects on health. So this, we're talking about illness and disease, both physical illness or mental illness. Those are the outcomes that we're concerned about when we're talking about environmental health. The second part of this definition is the environmental factors, and that is referring to the toxins that we may find in air, water, food, soil, dust, or products. Basically, all of the things or what we call vehicles that would transmit these toxins to us. And then environmental conditions are the places, the areas in which we receive those exposures. So whether we are at home or at work or outdoors or in a business, these environmental conditions, so our surroundings and the environmental factors, the elements and the transmission vehicles are what we study and we think about in terms of having an effect on human health. And then the ultimate goal of environmental health is around prevention and control. And this is to avoid and prevent illness or harm to human health. And we do this by trying to avoid exposures, remove hazards, and ultimately reduce risk of getting sick. So environmental health is, you can kind of look at it or think of it in as distinct from medicine, where medicine, if you go to the doctors, they're focused on treating a disease that has already happened. Environmental health and public health take a step back to try to find ways to prevent people from getting ill in the first place. And I like this little schematic on this side here that shows health kind of in the center of these three determinants. One being your genetic makeup, the way you were born, you can't control that. But these other two determinants are the environment, your surroundings, which you may or may not have control over, and then your everyday choices, which you 100% have control over. All those things work together and ultimately determine your overall health and well-being. So what do environmental scientists do? Within environmental health, there are a lot of people working together to answer a series of questions, again, trying to reach that ultimate goal of how do we prevent harm to human health. So we have, for example, ecologists who would maybe examine in the environment if and where there is a source of contamination. Then we have data collectors who go out and sample the environment or sample humans even to discover how much of that contamination is there. Then we have exposure modelers who use math and chemistry and very sophisticated computer programs to model and predict how much of this contamination in the environment is actually going to end up in our bodies. And then that's when toxicologists and microbiologists come in and share their knowledge around what those contaminants, whether they're a chemical toxin or microbial toxin, what are they going to do once they are inside our bodies, and how are they going to affect our health? And then the final kind of phase of environmental health would be risk analysis, where these analysts, again, run complicated computer programs to determine whether or not that exposure is safe. And so before I go any further, I want to give a couple of definitions just so we're all on the same page. So again, in environmental health, when we talk about environment, we're talking about every aspect of your personal surrounding. The air you're breathing, the water you're drinking, the things you're touching, the places where you spend time. An environmental chemical is then a compound or an element found in the environment around you or in consumer products. And a consumer product is essentially anything you can buy. It's food, it's clothes, it's lotion, it's building materials and art supplies. If you can buy it, it's a consumer product. Toxicity is a measure of how harmful a substance, meaning a chemical or microbial substance, is to humans and animals. And I'm going to go into toxicity measures a little bit more later. And a health outcome is a negative change in one's health or well-being. So this is essentially the end point that we're interested in. And when we say exposure, we are talking about the way by which a substance enters the body. So on that note, I want to ask you, have you ever been exposed to environmental chemicals? And can you think of ways that you may have been exposed? And you can just answer in the chat.
Dale says we all have question mark, right? So
Can you think of
on a yes, no, or you want a specific example?
I'm interested to see if people can come up with some examples of when and how they may have been exposed.
Yeah, so I'll give an example to get you guys started. I have a Band-Aid on my arm. I've had Band-Aids before. I literally get burned by Band-Aids. So it will burn my skin because of the chemicals that are in the adhesive.
Yeah. Be a bit of an
allergic. So we have, people are saying makeup and shampoo, car fuels, soil, plastics.
Love it. Yes, the short answer is yes, we all have. If you have eaten food or smoked or vaped, which I hope you haven't, or gone to a nail salon, drank water, breathed air, ridden in a car, dyed your hair, gone to a rec room or a gym, cuddled up in blankets, swam in a pool, lit candles, taken prescriptions, used deodorant, cleaned the bathroom, wore clothes, fry some eggs, bug spray, playing in the sand and playing in the grass and turf. All of these are ways that we have all been exposed to chemicals in our environment and in the products that we encounter every day. And of course, makeup. So yeah, so chemicals are everywhere. And as we learned in the pop quiz, chances are you've already been exposed to hundreds today. So thinking about exposure, what are the 3 ways you think we can be exposed to chemicals in terms of how they get inside our body? What might one be?
Nose, mouth, cuts, food, water.
Great. Yep. So
inhaling, breathing, eating. Sorry, there's always a delay.
No problem.
Air, inhalation, breathing them in, absorption through the skin, drinking, eating, inhaling, eating, intake of food and water.
Perfect.
Contact.
You guys are so right on. So the 3 main ways that we are exposed to chemicals are through ingestion, so eating or drinking, inhalation, what we breathe in, or absorption through skin contact, so what's absorbed through our skin. And chemicals, once they enter our body, behave very differently. So some will enter your body and then be excreted and eliminated through your urine or feces or sweat. Other chemicals will stay in your body and find their way into fat cells or tissues and just stay there and hunker down and accumulate the more you are exposed to that particular substance. And so scientists have conducted multiple studies and tested groups of thousands of people and found that 100% of people have hundreds of chemicals in their body at any given time. And it's quite alarming because these chemicals can also be passed down to babies. When a pregnant woman is exposed, has these chemicals in their body. And just goes to show how prevalent these chemical exposures are in our daily lives now. And so, of course, we care about this because many of these chemicals are potentially harmful to our health. And so there are two ways that we measure toxicity of chemicals. There's short-term toxicity or acute toxicity, and long-term or chronic toxicity. And so short-term toxicity, or the lethal dose, LD50, is a measure of how much of a chemical will kill 50% of a population. So this is an immediate impact. If you are exposed to a certain amount of a substance, there's a 50% chance that that amount will cause mortality or death. And so scientists conduct hundreds of experiments on substances to determine what that dose is, what that amount is that will cause death, that will be lethal when it's either ingested, so oral toxicity, when it's absorbed through the skin, so dermal toxicity, or when it's inhaled, so inhalation toxicity. And again, this measure of toxicity is just kind of the immediate outcome of death, so it's pretty severe. So just to give you a little context, caffeine is considered to be a moderately toxic substance. And I'm wondering if anybody knows what the most toxic substance on the planet is.
Lead, says Catalina.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Mercury, says Sage. We had a few others. Desmond also said lead, but Sage says mercury.
I'd say those are up there. How about the least toxic?
We got a couple other guesses. So Jack says gasoline, and his guess for least toxic is pure air. We have barium and botulinum. And then Alice wants to know, does it make a difference if you only buy organic and fair trade coffee? Sage is guessing radium.
Those are all really great guesses. And one of you hit the nail on the head with botulin. It's a bacteria, and this is the most toxic substance known on the planet. It takes the tiniest amount of this bacteria to cause death in 50% of a population, whereas the least toxic substance is actually pure water. This is a non-contaminated water, of course, and it would take essentially someone drinking over 7 liters of water all at once for water to be toxic. So everything can be toxic, just depends on how much is needed for it to be toxic. And for the caffeine, I don't think it matters whether it's organic or not, because it's not necessarily about the coffee. Caffeine is a compound on its own that's found in many products.
So Desmond was wondering, is botulin what they use for Botox?
Yes, it is.
That's what I thought.
So what they're doing there is they're using a dose that's less than the lethal dose. So there is a range with many compounds or substances where it's called a therapeutic dose. Before it becomes lethal, there may be a lower dose that actually has a medical benefit before it becomes harmful. So that's where they have capitalized on using this bacteria for Botox therapy. So in contrast to short-term or acute toxicity, we have chronic toxicity. And we like to know about this for the chemicals because this is the adverse health effects that can occur after repeated or continuous exposure. So I like this little graphic as well that shows you acute toxicity usually is talking about a larger one-time dose that causes a severe outcome. And chronic toxicity is measuring kind of a lower dose, but over a long period of time continually, and eventually will lead to a severe outcome. And so there are compounds out there that attack different parts of your body, and they are classified according to which part of the body, bodily system, biological systems that they target. So for example, a compound that causes cancer is classified as a carcinogen, and compounds that target your central nervous system or your brain are called neurotoxins. Compounds that interfere with your endocrine system or your hormones are reproductive and developmental toxins. And then similarly, there are toxins that will target your kidneys specifically, or they will target your immune system and really weaken your immune system and lead to autoimmune diseases like diabetes and lupus. And those we talk about as immunotoxins. So it's very important for us to know how chemicals, how they react when they enter the body, and what type of harm that they can cause to these different biological systems, so that we can predict what type of health outcome they could have over a long period of time of exposure. Are there any questions yet?
There's a few in the Q&A box. Catalina wants to know, are scientists hopefully not testing these safer products on animals? You know? Are they still testing products on animals?
So that's an interesting question. And if you're talking about the raw chemicals themselves, then yes, because that is essentially how we know whether or not a chemical is safe for humans or not. Most compounds are tested in labs on mice, on rats, on rabbits, sometimes on chimpanzees, and this is the baseline for how we know whether or not a compound is safe for humans or not. In terms of finished products, a lot of companies do not test their products on animals anymore. But in terms of toxicology, the backbone of toxicology really relies on animal studies.
So since every person reacts differently to chemicals, how do you determine what is that safe level then for everyone? Is it the lowest common denominator?
So that's a really good question, and there's a whole degree on that specifically. So in exposure assessment, there are often safety factors worked into the equation that determines risk and what's safe or what's not for different populations. Because yes, there are populations that are more vulnerable than others, depending on your age, sometimes your race, sometimes where you live, any underlying conditions. And so there are margins of error, margins of safety worked into those equations. So typically, if a product, for example, is going to be used for children as a children's product, they'll multiply the safety factor by 1,000 to give a buffer, an even greater buffer of caution to account for any uncertainty. Because with science, there's always uncertainty and there's always unknowns. So they do try to account for that by adding a margin of safety.
So Let's see. So some products you'll see, it will say known to the state of California to cause cancer.
Yeah.
Um, do they have to say that? And I've seen that too. Is that just because California has a different threshold?
Yeah. So that is a pretty good segue to where I want to go next around chemicals being regulated, because this is a question that I have always had, and one that concerns me quite deeply. Um, in the United States, chemicals are, consumer products are regulated, but chemicals themselves are not. And I want to take you back first to the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution, because over 200 years ago, this was really the kickoff to when humans started becoming exposed to chemicals through the invention of and manufacturing of products. But it wasn't until 1962, nearly 150, 60 years later, that a book was published by Rachel Carson called Silent Spring that really exposed the link between chemical use and health outcomes. And in this case, Rachel Carson uncovered how this pesticide called DDT was used pervasively, but remained in the environment, traveled up the food chain, got into humans, and then led to countless birth defects and cancers in exposed peoples. And so it really wasn't until that the public really became aware and outraged by this idea. And the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency was then created by Congress in 1970 to enforce laws designed to protect Americans from environmental hazards. However, it wasn't until a couple years later that the Consumer Product Safety Commission was established to deal with death and injury associated with consumer products specifically. So, then you can see another 6 years go by, and this is the first law that's passed that gives the EPA power to regulate chemicals in consumer products. So we're at 1976, that's 50 years ago. And since then, they have only banned 9 chemicals out of the 100,000 chemicals that exist in the marketplace today. And most of it is because of the way that law is written. It's because of resources. But in America, chemicals are essentially innocent until proven guilty. So they don't have to be proven to be safe. They have to be proven to be harmful, which is a very slippery slope. And I like this cartoon that kind of shows the difference between the precautionary principle, which is essentially better safe than sorry attitude, versus the burden of proof, which is, well, let's just wait and to see if anything bad happens first type of attitude. So, and it was only 4 years ago that Congress amended this Toxic Substance Control Act to allow for faster safety testing of chemicals. So currently the EPA has 40 chemicals under review, but hasn't banned any additional chemicals that scientists are calling for to be banned. So it's a very slow process. And California is important because states do have the power to write their own laws around chemical safety, and California is very progressive in this. They have some of the tightest safety laws around chemicals and consumer products in the country, and most manufacturers will abide by their laws rather than make multiple products for every state. They'll just make products that are acceptable to California. And so California has this Prop 65 Act, which is what you see on a lot of products, that their law is that those manufacturers have to disclose to consumers that those products contain chemicals known to cause cancer. And they say by the state of California because it's not a federally recognized statement. But the state of California has ruled that those chemicals are carcinogens according to their environmental health scientists. So the next few slides will introduce you to some chemical groups that I want you to know about and be aware of in your daily life. Pesticides like DDT, which you shouldn't run into because it's banned now from use, but glyphosate and chlorpyrifos are both pesticides that you'll find commonly in the marketplace. Glyphosate is what is made of, is what Roundup is. And you'll find this in the garden store, weed killer. People will apply it to lawns and fields to keep weeds from growing. There will be residue of pesticides on food and produce, and even military clothing and a lot of specialty uniforms are impregnated with pesticides to protect people from insects, but they're absorbing pesticides through their skin while wearing those clothing. And we're concerned about pesticides because we know them to be linked to multiple cancers, learning disabilities, neurological, cognitive problems, and then short-term effects like trouble breathing and nausea and vomiting and weakness. And so they're really something you want to look out for, especially if you see warnings about pesticide application anywhere. You want to make sure to not get too close. Another type of product, or another type of chemical, are plasticizers, and these are my personal favorite ones to hate. These are phthalates, BPAs, PCBs, for example. They are found in almost everything. They're what's used to make plastic and make products flexible. So you'll find them in anything plastic, canned food liners. Phthalates are what carry fragrances, so any fragrant products that are using synthetic fragrances, and then they're in almost every electronic and plumbing equipment, sporting gear, receipt paper. They are just everywhere, and they are mostly tied to reproductive and developmental toxicities such as miscarriages and infertility, learning disabilities, weight gain, diabetes, and cancers of the reproductive system.
So Desmond just wrote in the chat, what if it's BPA free? So that's indicating it doesn't, right? Or is that a misnomer?
I love that question. It's such a misnomer. BPA free essentially means that it has BPS or BPZ or BPF or some other chemical variant of bisphenol in it that hasn't been tested. So it's basically a marketing scam, for lack of a better word, in my opinion. So the way that we know, we expect chemicals of a similar structure to behave similarly to one another. And so the family of bisphenols are all very similar in terms of their structure and properties. And so we assume that the substitutes that manufacturers have found to replace BPA, such as BPS or BPZ or BPF, are in fact acting the same way as BPA. It's just that the scientific toxicology hasn't caught up with proving that those chemicals are guilty as well. But we suspect.
Are there any canned foods that are free from chemicals, or do all canned foods have the lining?
As far as I know, I believe I don't believe there has been any invention for plasticizer-free can linings. So I don't think so. Good questions. Another chemical I want you to know about are what's called or known as PFAs, polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are the chemicals that make your non-stick pans not sticky, that make water and spills bead off your couch, that make your yoga pants sweat wicking, or that make, you know, your skis slick and smooth on the bottom. These chemicals are one of what we call forever chemicals. They are so persistent in the environment, they never break down, and they are a huge concern in water contamination right now in drinking water. And they've been linked to cancers, to weakened immunity in children, reducing the effectiveness of vaccines, hormone disruption, obesity. So these chemicals are hugely concerning as well, but rather easy to avoid from a consumer product standpoint. But it is very concerning how pervasive these are in the environment, and how widespread they are in our waterways. And lastly, I want to bring your attention to VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. These are carbon-containing molecules that evaporate or off-gas at room temperature. So they are the fumes that you smell from nail polish or paint, that new car smell, new flooring, new furniture, cigarette smoke, the mist from cleaning products, all of this from fuels, gasoline. They release these compounds that are invisible, but can be really harmful to people's health, especially in the short term. A lot of people who work in offices, or even kids at school with really kind of tight indoor environments, can often complain of this sick building syndrome, which is believed to be caused by exposure to VOCs in the air, which just make you really sluggish and lethargic and have headaches and maybe some allergies. And so it's kind of an invisible killer. And so just quickly, some real life examples here. This year, as of this year, Johnson & Johnson, who makes baby powder, has actually been sued by over 19,000 people, I think, in the past couple of years, because their baby powder and shower-to-shower talcum powder was shown to be responsible for thousands of people's ovarian cancer cases. And in this case, it came out that the company, Johnson & Johnson, even knew their scientists were telling them that there was a contamination in their talc powder and risk to human health. And it was not disclosed to the public for decades, until people started having cancer and making the connection themselves. So it can have serious consequences when you're using the same product every day, little by little over your lifetime, and that product is not safe. And then I wanted to point out here in Burlington, if some of you may be aware, the Burlington High School is closed right now due to PCB contamination in the air. And this is essentially old building products off-gassing, breaking down, contaminating the air of this high school, so much so that it's unsafe to be there and breathe in this air. And so this is just, I thought, a really good current example of how environmental health can affect a community. And then lastly, I was reading this study that came out by the Toxic Free Future organization out of Washington. They're a great organization to know if you're interested in environmental health. They test products. So the government doesn't do a very good job of testing products, but nonprofit groups like Toxic Free Future and the Environmental Working Group, they do a great job of testing products that are on the market for toxins. And so this was suggesting how fast food containers contain these PFAs, these forever chemicals I was just talking about, and how they're even saying, be careful with your exposure to them because they can weaken your immune system. And right now, especially when we're battling an infectious disease like COVID-19, which really targets the immune system, you want to make sure you're doing everything you can to keep your immune system strong. So again, your health is determined by three things: your genes, your environment, and the choices that you make every day. And I want to leave you with a little bit more of a positive, optimistic view about what you can do to reduce your risk. So very simple equation for risk. Risk equals exposure times hazard. And so the hazard, who can tell me what the hazard is we're talking about here?
Yes, just type it in the chat. What do you think the hazard is? Yeah, chemical, says Catalina.
Right.
And so does Alice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the chemical or the microbial, and the level of hazard depends on how toxic it is. And so what's the exposure then?
What do you guys think the exposure is? Yeah, Catalina says your time using it.
Yep. So how much is getting into your body through ingestion, inhalation, or skin contact? And then, of course, our risk is the outcome of illness, disease, or injury and what we want to avoid. So some really easy ways to reduce your risk. One, reduce the number of products in your life and home. The amount of things that are in our indoor environments that are constantly off-gassing VOCs can really add up. And so even just by decluttering, removing products you don't need, replacing some synthetic products with more natural materials can really make a big difference in your indoor air quality and your exposure to VOCs. Number two, avoid plastic. One of the easiest ways you can reduce your exposure to plasticizers and endocrine disruptors is by avoiding plastic as much as possible. Choose unscented, fragrance-free natural products. Again, just really easy ways to reduce the number of chemicals that are required for those products. When you buy new clothes or fabrics, wash them before you wear them. We did learn in my studies that washing your clothes, the first 5 washes pretty much, reduces most and eliminates most of the chemicals that have been put in those fabrics. So you can really save yourself some exposure by washing them a couple of times before you wear them, or even buying used or like consignment clothing, which is what I do now. And then choosing your foods carefully, avoiding packaged processed foods as much as possible. There's a lot of contamination that happens in the packaging of foods, and so if you can choose unpackaged fresh fruits, grains, vegetables, more than you choose packaged processed foods, you'll definitely reduce your exposure to some pesticides and other contaminants. So here are my 3 top takeaways for you today. Environmental health science is a multidisciplinary field that works together to prevent illness, injury, and disease. Most chemicals found in products in the United States are not proven to be safe. but you are the best frontline defense for protecting yourself from chemical exposures because you make the choices about what you buy and what you eat. So here are my final tips for you. If you are interested in this topic and want to learn more, which I hope you are, you can go to the CDC/NCEH website. They have tons of information about a multitude of other chemicals that you might want to look out for. If you're here in Vermont, you can get involved with the Vermont Public Interest Group and help push forward and encourage them to call for stricter laws to make products safer. And no matter where you are in the country, you can reach out to your local public interest group or Congress people to tell them that you care about safe consumer product laws. I would also encourage you to sign up for the Environmental Health News newsletter. If you have an email or can get on the internet, this is a great website for getting environmental health news around the United States and around the world. And then 2 movies I recommend as a new documentary, Stink, about chemicals in consumer products, One Dad's Journey to Uncover the Truth, and this classic throwback movie where Julia Roberts plays Erin Brockovich is really kind of a classic in environmental health tales. And if you have a smartphone, I would also say download this app called Skin Deep by EWG. This is really cool. You can scan the barcode of products in the store, like shampoos and toothpaste and lotions and makeups, and it'll give you a score for how hazardous the ingredients in that product are. So it can help you make decisions about what types of products you want to buy. And that is it.
Wow, that's fantastic. Those resources are just great. Maybe can you go back to the resource page while we're taking questions, just so people have time to look them up. Before we go to final questions, I'm going to just launch our last poll just to get some feedback. So there's 2 questions, 1 to 5, 5 being excellent. Let us know how you thought today went and how much you learned. This is always good information for us. And then we'll get to our final questions. And hopefully get everyone out on time today. We're never on time, so this is great. All right, so it looks like just about everybody has got into the poll, so thank you on that. Let's go into the questions and see what you guys. Oh, I know. So Che has been wanting to know since we started. What is your business venture name again?
Healthy Home Assessments.
Healthy Home Assessments.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So many poisons. Why aren't we dead? Sorry if this sounds wrong, but no, that's a great question. I mean, you guys are realizing there's toxic chemicals everywhere. So that's a really very good question.
Yeah. It is a very good question. And if I can navigate to some additional slides, I can show you that we are dying of environmental exposures. This is one graph that shows when cigarettes started to be consumed and the death rate that followed thereafter due to lung cancer. And let's see, sorry, this is blocking my view.
There you go.
These are the percent of total deaths by environmental cause. So you can see a lot of deaths are caused by these chronic health effects that are tied to these exposures. So you're right that there's not a lot of acute poisoning happening, that immediate death, but we are developing more and more as a society these chronic illnesses that will eventually lead to death. And I like this graph too that shows in the history of humans, so a million years ago, 100,000 years ago, humans died of three main causes. One, war. Two, vector-borne diseases. So these are animal spread diseases like the plague, and then periodic famine. That is all that killed humans before the Industrial Revolution. And now we have added all these different ways of dying into our culture, and chemical toxin exposure being a big one. And this is a bit outdated. I would also add climate change and natural disaster now to our sources of death in this world.
All right. So how much are pets affected? And if I can just share a story to kind of to let you all know how pets are affected. Years ago, I lived, and my neighbors had just had some new carpet put in, and they were distressed because their dogs puked all over their brand new carpet. And I said, well, did you open up the doors and windows? And they looked at me like I was crazy because it's Vermont and it was cold. And they said, why would we do that? I was like, well, because your carpets are off-gassing and your dogs are being, given toxins, and that's why they're throwing up. And they had no idea that was a thing. So pets are affected, but I'm sure you have actual statistics.
No, absolutely. I don't have statistics off the top of my head, but pets are absolutely sensitive to toxins, and different pets are sensitive in different ways. At Seventh Generation, I know we run studies for products that are aerosolized to see if they are toxic to birds, because birds have a much higher sensitivity to air pollution than, say, cats or dogs. And so there are tests that consumer product companies can do to see how their products affect different animals. The tricky part is they don't often share that information with us, with the public. But yeah, animals are definitely used as an indicator because they are smaller and more sensitive to exposures than humans.
So there's a question asking if the coronavirus is toxic, and I think if I remember, you had that section that said it's not toxic, but toxic exposure can actually make you more susceptible to viruses. Did I hear that right?
Yes. So there's a lot of things going on to our bodies all at once. And the term, if you want to research it more, is called your total body burden. And this looks and thinks about all the multiple compounding exposures that we're receiving every day, all at the same time, and how they affect one another. And so, yes, right now with COVID surging, there is a lot of talk and worry about how some of these other exposures we've had over the past many decades are weakening our ability to fight off infection or be resilient to viruses like the coronavirus. So yeah, there's a lot of things at play that kind of compound one another. So yeah, it's a susceptibility. It's like if you're a smoker, if you smoke cigarettes for many years, you're going to weaken the strength of your lungs and your lungs' capacity to function fully, and so then you become more susceptible to getting diseases like pneumonia. So it makes it harder for your body to fight and use its natural defenses.
The next question, companies like Norwex say they are safe. Is it true? Do you know?
I don't know Norwex. What is that?
If you want to type in the chat what Norwex is, I'm not familiar with that company either. While we're waiting, let's go to another question. I think this is in relation to the labelings. Why only California?
Well, that's a good question. It's a lot of political will. California has just been a leader in a lot of ways for environmental health and environmental initiatives. And they have a lot of influence and sway in the industry, again, because they're one of the biggest states. They have one of the largest populations and consumers, the most consumers. So companies listen to their laws, but that's really a matter of politics.
And Catalina just wrote in the chat, why are they the only one testing? I mean, they're not the only ones testing. They just have politically, as Julie's saying, they can make laws and they have the political will to do it that can then affect the rest of the country because they have such a large population. And so if you're manufacturing something and California has a rule, you're going to manufacture to California's laws because they buy more than any other state. So California can sort of be the leader in that.
Right. Manufacturers don't always want to make two separate products, one just for California and one for everywhere else. And it's on right now, it's on the manufacturer to do all the testing. You really have to trust the company who's making the product.
Okay, so I learned what Norwex is. Norwex is a chemical-free company that sells cleaning and body products, but you still don't know who they are. So we can't answer if their claims are true or not.
Right. So what I would do is, if you're interested in that company specifically, I would write to them or call them and ask for their ingredient list of their products so that you can actually see what each product is made out of. That will be your best indication as to whether or not you think those products are going to be safe. Because then once you have those ingredients, you can look up the safety of each chemical.
All right, we're going to do our final questions. I'm going to ask that no more questions come into the chat, into the Q&A, so we can get to the questions that have been in here already. Is makeup from France or outside the States except China okay? I mean, it's not amazing, but is it better?
So I would say, most simply, European companies are held to a higher standard than the United States when it comes to personal care products. So without looking specifically at a product versus another, I would generally assume that European products would be a little bit safer than products manufactured in the United States because they are held to a higher standard in Europe. I don't believe China has such strict manufacturing laws, so I would put them below the U.S. in terms of confidence of their safety.
There are two questions that are somewhat related. First question, how can we reduce our exposure to plastics? And related question, is there any way to tell which products are safe?
So avoiding plastics is really, it's really easy to do kind of a very first step. It's easy to start to look at everything you buy and notice what it comes in. Is it a plastic bottle or is it a glass bottle or a metal bottle? Are your clothes polyester? If they are, then that's part plastic. So if they're organic cotton, then they're not. You can think about food containers and whether they're glass or plastic. Water bottles are one. If you don't own a stainless steel water bottle, I recommend that you get one and replace all plastic water bottles, disposable water bottles going forward. I think it just takes noticing your products more and looking for the alternatives. And then the second part of that question was,
How to
sorry.
tell which products are safe. And I think, is that going to that website that you told them about with the environmental working group?
Yeah, I would recommend downloading that app and looking at the Skin Deep database through the environmental working group. You can also read product labels. Every product is kind of has its own different set of rules and standards, whether you're talking about food or personal care or cleaning products or furniture, but you should be able to know what's inside the products you're buying. And if they're not available, if they're not written on the label, then you should be able to call and write to the manufacturer and get that information from them. If they are unwilling to share that information with you, I would worry that they have something to hide and ask them why not, why they are uncomfortable sharing. So I think it does take some work at first to get to know the different companies that are making better efforts to putting out products that are less harmful to human health. But once you do that work, then you can really rely on those companies. But there's no requirement for companies to disclose their ingredients or make any type of health and safety claim.
So related, what certifications or something like that should we look for to avoid falling victim to greenwashing?
That's a great question. There are several certifications out there, but again, it depends on what type of product it is. So the Environmental Working Group has their own certification for cleaning and personal care products. The EPA has a certification called Safer Choice. It used to be called Design for the Environment. Now it's called Safer Choice. They're just for cleaning products. There's another certification called Made Safe, and they're on a lot of makeups, personal care products, mattresses, but there's not one size fits all when it comes to certifications. So again, you really just need to get to know the companies, read the labels, and learn more about those certifications. If you do see one on a label, I would do some research to see what that means.
Okay, can plants and trees help regulate the chemicals in the air?
They can. There are some plants out there that have been studied to remediate air quality and can absorb some air pollutants. I know the peace lily is one, but you can find resources of what plants are recommended for improving indoor air quality pretty regularly online. But that's a good question, and I would say yes, it can. It can also, plants are also used in soil remediation. So if there are contamination in soil environments, often certain plants are planted which will absorb those contaminants in the soil and uptake them into their roots and remove them from the soil. So yeah, plants can be very useful.
Great. So we have two more questions. We're going to try to answer them quickly because I know we're over time. So the first one should be a yes or no, I think. Is silicone safe?
I would say yes, as an alternative to plastic.
And last, how were you able to find international volunteering opportunities?
I used idealist.org originally. Idealist.org was a website that I used to search for volunteer opportunities. But other than that, it was a lot of word of mouth, just from talking to people about what I was interested in doing and doing some internet searches on my own. I really didn't want to volunteer through an organization that was based in the US when I was working in Nepal or or an organization where all the money was going to the UK. When I wanted to be in Cambodia, I looked for locally rooted organizations in the place that I wanted to be doing the work that I wanted to do. So it takes some research and some talking to people and networking, but they're out there, and you shouldn't have to pay to do it.
And I would say, don't be afraid of, if you find an organization that you are interested in, send them an email and just ask them, be like, I'm really interested in this. Would you have intern opportunities?
Yeah.
So you just never know. So don't be afraid to ask. And so with that, let's all thank Julie for her really informative cafe today. This was such good information. Just want to thank you, and I hope that we'll see you all next week when we're going to be talking about nanomaterials. So everyone have a good night, and again, I hope to see you all next week. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.